The crystalline transport ship Ethereal Dawn hummed with barely contained energy as it approached the outer rim of human space. Inside the observation chamber, Zoexthala pressed her four-fingered hands against the viewing portal, watching the distant blue-white star grow larger with each passing moment. Her iridescent skin shifted from pale green to deep purple, betraying her nervousness despite her best efforts to maintain diplomatic composure. As the chief xenobiologist for the Galactic Confederation's research division, Zoexthala had observed dozens of species across the known galaxy. She had cataloged the hunting patterns of the silicon-based Krexmori, documented the hive-mind intelligence of the floating gas creatures of Nebula 7, and even survived a close encounter with the aggressive but primitive Thorak raiders. Yet none of those experiences had prepared her for this assignment. The humans were different. They had appeared on the galactic stage only 3 standard cycles ago, bursting from their single-system civilization with technology that defied conventional understanding. While most species took millennia to develop faster-than-light travel, these beings had accomplished it in mere centuries. While other races evolved past their aggressive tendencies as they reached for the stars, humans seemed to carry their violent nature with them like a badge of honor. The Confederation Council had been divided on how to approach humanity. Some members, led by the peaceful Velthari, advocated for immediate contact and integration. Others, particularly the militaristic Corvan Empire, viewed humans as a potential threat that needed to be assessed and possibly contained. The compromise had been this mission, a covert observation study to determine humanity's true nature before formal first contact. Zoexthala's assignment was specific, and she had thought straightforward. She was to observe human military capabilities and social structures during times of conflict. The Council needed to understand how humans fought, how they organized their forces, and, most importantly, how dangerous they might be to established galactic civilization. What the Council hadn't told her, what she was beginning to suspect they didn't know themselves, was that humans were already at war. The viewing screen flickered to life, displaying a 3-dimensional holographic map of the local star system. Captain Velroth, the ship's commanding officer and a member of the same species as Zoexthala, materialized beside the display with his usual formal demeanor. His skin remained a steady, professional blue-gray as he pointed to various locations on the map. "We've detected significant energy signatures throughout this system," he reported, his voice carrying the melodic undertones typical of their species. "Combat is ongoing between 2 human factions. The local government forces appear to be engaged with what our linguistic computers have translated as insurgent or rebel forces." Zoexthala studied the tactical display with growing fascination. The scale of the conflict was immediately apparent. Energy weapon discharges lit up space around 3 different planetary bodies, while massive metal constructs that could only be warships moved in complex patterns around asteroid fields and orbital stations. The sheer size of the human vessels was staggering. Where most Confederation ships were elegant, streamlined affairs designed for exploration and peaceful contact, these human warships looked like they had been built for one purpose: destruction. "Have they detected our presence?" she asked, noting how their cloaking technology had performed against human sensors. Captain Velroth's skin shifted to a slight orange tinge, indicating uncertainty. "Unknown. Their scanning technology operates on frequencies we don't fully understand. Our stealth systems were designed to fool Confederation sensors, not human ones. However, if they have detected us, they show no signs of caring. They appear completely focused on destroying each other." The clinical detachment in his voice couldn't hide what Zoexthala was already beginning to feel, a creeping sense of unease. Through her previous observations, she had learned that most species fought for territory, resources, or survival. But as she watched the tactical display update in real time, showing the movement of hundreds of ships and the deployment of what appeared to be millions of individual combatants, she began to understand that human conflict operated on a scale that defied her experience. "Take us closer to the main battle zone," she instructed. I need detailed recordings of their combat techniques and social organization under stress. As the ethereal dawn moved deeper into the system, Zwaigstala activated her personal recording equipment and began documenting her observations. The first thing that struck her was the humans' apparent disregard for their own safety. While Confederation protocols emphasized the preservation of life above all else, human combat doctrine seemed to accept massive casualties as an inevitable part of warfare. She watched through high-powered sensors as human soldiers launched themselves from transport ships toward heavily fortified positions, their small forms silhouetted against the burning atmosphere of a contested moon. These weren't the calculated, defensive maneuvers she had observed in other species. These humans were attacking, charging directly into enemy fire with a ferocity that made her skin ripple with involuntary color changes. The technology they employed was equally disturbing. Where most galactic civilizations had moved beyond kinetic weapons in favor of more precise energy systems, humans seemed to delight in devices designed to cause maximum destruction. She recorded the deployment of projectile weapons that fired dense metal slugs at incredible velocities, explosives that could shatter reinforced positions, and energy weapons that seemed designed not just to disable, but to completely annihilate their targets. But it was their coordination that truly began to unnerve her. Despite the apparent chaos of battle, human forces moved with a precision that suggested extensive training and communication systems far more advanced than their relatively recent emergence into space should have allowed. Individual soldiers seemed capable of making complex tactical decisions independently while maintaining perfect coordination with larger strategic objectives. As the observation continued into the ship's night cycle, Zwaigstala found herself unable to sleep. The images from the human battlefield replayed in her mind. The way soldiers continued fighting even when seriously wounded, the casual efficiency with which they eliminated enemies, and perhaps most disturbing of all, the way they seemed to adapt their tactics in real time to overcome any obstacle. She had observed predator species before, but those creatures hunted for food or territory. What she was witnessing in human combat was something different entirely. These beings fought with an intensity and creativity that suggested warfare was not just something they did, but something they excelled at on a fundamental level. The next morning, Captain Velroth brought disturbing news. Our long-range sensors have detected additional human fleets moving toward this system, he reported, his skin now a deep purple that indicated extreme concern. The scale of this conflict appears to be far larger than we initially estimated. Based on energy signatures and fleet movements, we estimate that over 50 million individual combatants are involved in this single engagement. Zwaigstala felt her own skin cycle through several color changes as the implications hit her. 50 million soldiers in a single battle was larger than the entire military force of most Confederation member species. If this was typical of human conflict, then the species' military capability was orders of magnitude greater than anyone had suspected. There's something else, Velroth continued, his formal composure slipping slightly. We've been monitoring their communications. The linguistic computers have been working to decode their military transmissions, and what we're learning is troubling. He activated a holographic display that showed translated excerpts from human communications. Zwaigstala read through them with growing horror. The humans weren't just fighting, they were enjoying it. Their communications were filled with what the computers classified as aggressive enthusiasm and competitive satisfaction. These beings weren't reluctant warriors defending their homes. They were predators who had turned warfare into an art form. As she continued reading, another disturbing pattern emerged. The human forces demonstrated an almost casual familiarity with destruction that suggested this level of conflict was normal for them. They had developed specialized terminology for hundreds of different combat scenarios, weapon systems with capabilities that exceeded most Confederation defensive technology, and tactical doctrines that assumed the complete annihilation of enemy forces as a standard objective. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The Galactic Confederation had spent millennia developing peaceful contact protocols based on the assumption that any species advanced enough to achieve interstellar travel would have evolved beyond primitive aggressive impulses. Every species they had encountered followed this pattern. Even the militant Corvan Empire, despite their authoritarian structure, fought only for specific political objectives and sought to minimize casualties when possible. Humans appeared to be the exception to everything the galaxy thought it knew about intelligent evolution. "Captain," she said quietly, "I think we need to consider the possibility that we're not observing a typical human conflict. This might be how they always fight." Velroth's skin cycled through several rapid color changes before settling on a steady, deep red that indicated alarm. "Are you suggesting that a species capable of this level of organized violence has achieved interstellar travel?" Before ZYXDALA could answer, the ship's alert systems activated. Through the viewing portal, they could see new energy signatures appearing throughout the system as additional human fleets arrived. But these weren't reinforcements for either side in the existing conflict. These were entirely different factions, each with distinct ship designs and tactical formations. The two-sided battle she had been observing was about to become a four-way war zone. As she watched the tactical display update to show the new arrivals taking positions throughout the system, ZYXDALA realized that her mission had just become far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. She wasn't just observing human combat capabilities. She was witnessing something that might force the Galactic Confederation to reconsider everything they thought they knew about intelligent life in the universe. The humans weren't just capable of warfare. They appeared to be a species that had industrialized it, perfected it, and spread it across the stars as naturally as other races spread art or philosophy. And now, as she watched ships bearing the markings of at least 6 different human factions position themselves for what appeared to be the largest space battle in recorded galactic history, she began to understand why her superiors had chosen her for this mission. They hadn't sent her to evaluate whether humans could be trusted. They had sent her to determine whether they could be stopped. The battle began at 0347 ship time with a flash of light that temporarily overloaded the ethereal dawn sensors. When the systems recalibrated, ZYXDALA found herself staring at a display showing energy outputs that defied her understanding of physics. The humans weren't just fighting, they were rewriting the fundamental rules of space combat as she watched. The first exchange between the arriving fleets lasted exactly 17 seconds and resulted in the complete destruction of 43 vessels, each the size of a small city. What horrified ZYXDALA wasn't the scale of the destruction, but the apparent casualness with which the humans inflicted it. Their weapons didn't simply disable enemy ships. They vaporized them with an efficiency that suggested this level of devastation was routine. "Can you isolate individual tactical communications?" she asked Captain Velroth, her skin cycling through rapid color changes as she struggled to process what she was witnessing. "The linguistic computers are working at maximum capacity," he replied, his own coloration now a steady deep purple that indicated extreme stress. "But, yes, we're beginning to translate individual unit communications." The first translated transmission appeared on ZYXDALA's display, and she immediately wished she hadn't asked to hear it. A human voice, identified by the computer as belonging to what appeared to be a ship commander, was discussing the annihilation of an enemy vessel with the same tone another species might use to comment on weather conditions. "Target eliminated. Crew complement estimated at 15,000. Moving to secondary objectives." 15,000 lives ended in a single moment, and the human response was to calmly move on to the next target. ZYXDALA had to remind herself that this was an observation mission, not a rescue operation. Her role was to document and understand, not to intervene. But as she watched the tactical display update to show hundreds of similar engagements occurring simultaneously throughout the system, she began to question whether any degree of understanding could justify witnessing this level of carnage. The complexity of the human battle formations became apparent as the engagement continued. What had initially appeared to be chaotic violence revealed itself to be an intricate dance of coordinated destruction. Each faction employed different tactical doctrines, but all shared certain characteristics that distinguish human warfare from anything in Confederation records. The first characteristic was adaptability. As Zwaxthala watched, she observed human commanders completely restructuring their battle plans in real time to respond to changing conditions. When one fleet deployed a new weapon system, enemy forces immediately began developing countermeasures. When tactical formations proved ineffective, they were abandoned and replaced within minutes. The speed of tactical evolution was unlike anything she had seen in other species, who typically required extensive planning and preparation before implementing new strategies. The second characteristic was redundancy. Human fleets didn't just have backup plans. They had backup plans for their backup plans. Every major vessel was accompanied by support craft designed to continue the mission if the primary ship was destroyed. Every tactical objective had multiple approaches available simultaneously. Even their individual soldiers seemed trained to assume multiple roles within their units, allowing them to maintain combat effectiveness despite massive casualties. The third and most disturbing characteristic was escalation. Rather than seeking to minimize conflict, human tactical doctrine seemed designed to intensify it. When faced with resistance, their response wasn't to negotiate or find alternative approaches, but to deploy more powerful weapons and commit additional forces. The battle that had begun with conventional energy weapons had already escalated to include kinetic projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed and exotic energy discharges that interfered with the ethereal dawn sensors from thousands of kilometers away. Zwaxthala, Captain Velroth, said urgently, interrupting her observations. "We're receiving a transmission." She turned to face him, noting that his skin had shifted to a pattern she had never seen before, rapid, alternating bands of red and white that suggested panic barely held in check. From whom? The humans. They're broadcasting on multiple frequencies in what appears to be a standard first contact protocol. The implications hit her immediately. If the humans were attempting first contact while engaged in this level of combat, it suggested several disturbing possibilities. Either they were so confident in their military superiority that they could spare attention for diplomatic contact during battle, or they considered massive space warfare to be a normal condition that didn't preclude other activities. "Put it through," she instructed, activating her recording systems. The transmission that appeared on the main display defied every assumption she had made about human priorities. A figure that was clearly human appeared on screen, bipedal, roughly her own height, with a distinctive bilateral symmetry and forward-facing eyes that marked them as predators. But what struck her immediately was the being's demeanor. Despite the massive battle raging around them, the human appeared completely calm, almost friendly. "Unknown vessel," the human began, speaking in what the computer identified as a common human language called English. "This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Colonial Defense Force. We've detected your presence in our combat zone and wanted to ensure your safety." Zwaxthala felt her skin cycle through several rapid color changes. The humans were concerned about her safety while simultaneously conducting the largest space battle in recorded history. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Admiral Chun continued, apparently unaware of the effect her words were having. "We're currently engaged in what you might consider a large-scale tactical exercise. If you're here for observational purposes, we'd be happy to provide you with better sensor positions and tactical briefings. However, if you're here for diplomatic contact, we recommend waiting until we've concluded current operations." A tactical exercise. They were calling this massive display of destruction a tactical exercise. Zwaxthala realized she needed to respond, but found herself struggling to formulate appropriate words. How did one respond to a species that treated warfare as a routine training activity? This is researcher Zwaxthala of the Galactic Confederation. She managed her voice translator working to convert her species' melodic tones into human audible frequencies. "We are here on a peaceful observation mission. Admiral Chen's expression brightened noticeably. Excellent. First contact with a galactic civilization. We've been hoping for this opportunity. She paused, apparently receiving information from someone off-screen. I'm being informed that our current exercise is scheduled to conclude in approximately 6 hours. Would you be interested in observing our post-battle analysis and tactical review? The casual way the human discussed the death of what Zwaigstala estimated to be millions of sentient beings as a tactical review sent waves of horrified fascination through her consciousness. This species didn't just wage war. They studied it, refined it, and apparently invited observers to learn from their methods. We would be interested in any information you're willing to share, she replied, trying to maintain diplomatic protocols despite her growing unease. Outstanding, Admiral Chen responded. I'll transmit coordinates for a safe observation position. Fair warning, though, we're about to transition to the final phase of the exercise, which involves testing some of our newer weapon systems. You might want to increase your shield strength and maintain minimum safe distance of, let's see, 50,000 kilometers should be sufficient. The transmission ended, leaving Zwaigstala staring at a set of coordinates that positioned her ship at what humans considered a safe distance from weapons that required 50,000 kilometers of clearance. For perspective, most Confederation energy weapons were considered dangerous at ranges measured in hundreds of meters. As the ethereal dawn moved to the designated observation position, Zwaigstala found herself confronted with a fundamental question that would reshape everything the galaxy thought it knew about intelligent life. The humans weren't just another military species like the Corvins. They were something entirely outside galactic experience, a civilization that had made warfare into both an art form and a science, pursuing it with the same dedication other species applied to philosophy, art, or spiritual development. The final phase Admiral Chen had mentioned began with a series of energy discharges that registered on sensors as small artificial stars. Entire sections of the asteroid field that had served as the battle's backdrop simply ceased to exist, converted to expanding clouds of plasma by weapons that seemed to draw energy from sources Zwaigstala couldn't identify. But what truly disturbed her was the precision with which these devastating weapons were employed. Despite their incredible destructive capability, human forces used them with surgical accuracy, eliminating specific targets while leaving nearby friendly units completely unharmed. This wasn't the crude application of overwhelming force. This was sophisticated, controlled violence executed by beings who understood destruction on a level that bordered on the artistic. Through the continuous stream of intercepted communications, Zwaigstala began to understand the true scope of what she was witnessing. The humans weren't just fighting a single battle. They were conducting what they called a multi-faction tactical simulation designed to test new weapons, train personnel, and develop strategies for potential future conflicts. The millions of participants weren't reluctant combatants forced into battle, but volunteers who had specifically requested assignment to what they considered an advanced training opportunity. The realization that humans actively sought out combat experience as a form of personal development sent Zwaigstala's skin into color patterns she didn't know she was capable of producing. Every other species she had studied viewed warfare as an unfortunate necessity to be avoided whenever possible. These beings appeared to view it as an essential life experience, comparable to education or career development. As the 6-hour exercise neared its conclusion, Zwaigstala noticed something that would haunt her for the rest of her career. Despite the massive scale of destruction, despite casualties that would represent an existential crisis for any other species, human communications remained not just professional, but enthusiastic. Individual commanders were discussing the battle's events with obvious excitement, analyzing tactics and weapon effectiveness with a passion other beings reserve for artistic or intellectual pursuits. When Admiral Chen's transmission resumed, announcing the exercise's successful conclusion, Zwaigstala realized she was no longer conducting a simple observation mission. She was documenting the discovery of something that would force the Galactic Confederation to confront the possibility that their fundamental assumptions about intelligence, civilization, and peaceful coexistence might be catastrophically wrong. The humans weren't just another species to be contacted and integrated. They were a force of nature that had achieved consciousness, developed technology, and taken to the stars without abandoning the predatory instincts that had shaped their evolution. And now, as she prepared to witness their post-battle analysis, she began to understand that her mission had evolved from observation to something far more critical. Determining whether the galaxy was big enough for both humanity and everyone else. The post-battle analysis began with Admiral Chen's ship docking with what the humans called a mobile tactical center, a massive structure that had apparently been constructed during the 6-hour battle specifically for the purpose of reviewing combat performance. As Zwaxthala watched through her sensors, she realized that human military capability extended far beyond simple destruction. They possessed the ability to deploy complete industrial infrastructure in the middle of active combat zones. Researcher Zwaxthala, Admiral Chen's voice came through the communication system. We'd like to invite you aboard for the tactical review. This represents a unique opportunity for cross-species military analysis. The casual way the human phrased the invitation, as if exposure to their methods of organized violence was some kind of educational opportunity, sent Zwaxthala skin through another series of involuntary color changes. But her scientific training overcame her personal horror. If she was going to complete her mission and provide the Confederation Council with actionable intelligence, she needed to understand human military thinking from the inside. "We accept your invitation," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. The docking procedure itself provided yet another glimpse into human engineering philosophy, where Confederation vessels used elegant, organic-looking connection systems that emphasized harmony between different technologies. The human docking bay was a masterpiece of functional brutality. Massive mechanical arms seized the ethereal dawn with enough force to crack most ship hulls, then guided it into a berthing position with mechanical precision. Everything about the design suggested that it had been built to accommodate vessels arriving under combat conditions, possibly damaged, possibly under fire. When Zwaxthala and Captain Velroth materialized inside the human station using their species' standard transportation technology, they found themselves surrounded by an environment that challenged every assumption about civilized space habitation. The corridors were wide enough to accommodate rapid troop movement. The lighting was harsh and functional rather than aesthetically pleasing, and every surface showed signs of being designed for easy replacement rather than permanent installation. But it was the humans themselves that proved most disturbing. The station was staffed by thousands of individuals, all apparently involved in different aspects of what they called combat analysis. These weren't traumatized survivors of a horrific battle. They were enthusiastic professionals discussing the recent violence with the same intellectual excitement Zwaxthala might expect from scientists who had just made a breakthrough discovery. Admiral Chun met them at the transportation point, and Zwaxthala got her first close look at a human in person. The being was shorter than she had expected, but carried herself with a confidence that seemed to radiate physical danger. Her clothing, what Chun called a uniform, was clearly designed for functionality rather than aesthetics, with numerous attachment points for equipment and materials that could serve both protective and offensive functions. "Welcome to Tactical Analysis Station Bravo," Admiral Chin said, leading them through corridors filled with bustling human activity. "We've prepared a comprehensive briefing on today's exercise results. I think you'll find our methodologies quite interesting." As they walked, Zwaxthala observed hundreds of humans engaged in activities that defied her understanding of post-combat behavior. Rather than mourning their losses or celebrating their survival, they were enthusiastically reviewing recorded battle footage, analyzing weapon effectiveness data, and developing modifications to their tactics and equipment. The atmosphere was more reminiscent of an academic conference than the aftermath of the largest space battle in recorded history. The main briefing chamber was a circular amphitheater filled with displays showing three-dimensional tactical reconstructions of the recent battle. As Admiral Chun led them to observation seats, Zhuangxtala realized that every aspect of the 6-hour engagement had been recorded, analyzed, and converted into teaching materials. The humans hadn't just fought a massive battle, they had documented it as a learning experience. Before we begin the formal analysis, Admiral Chun announced to the assembled crowd, "I'd like to introduce our guest from the Galactic Confederation. Researcher Zhuangxtala and Captain Velroth represent our first contact with a galactic civilization, and they've expressed interest in observing our tactical methodologies." The response from the human audience was immediate and enthusiastic. Rather than viewing alien observers as a distraction during their military analysis, they seemed genuinely excited about the opportunity to share their combat knowledge with representatives of other species. Several humans approached with questions about Confederation military doctrine, asking detailed questions about weapons technology, tactical formations, and combat philosophy with the intensity of dedicated scholars. What disturbed Zhuangxtala most was the assumption underlying their questions. The humans weren't asking whether other species engage in warfare. They were asking how other species conducted their wars. To them, military conflict was apparently such a fundamental aspect of intelligent life that they couldn't conceive of a civilization that had evolved beyond it. The formal analysis began with what Admiral Chun called a casualty assessment. Holographic displays showed the final tallies from the exercise: 2.7 million human personnel killed, 847 vessels destroyed, and material losses equivalent to the gross domestic product of most Confederation member worlds. The numbers were presented with the same clinical detachment one might use to discuss manufacturing statistics. But what followed challenged Zhuangxtala's understanding of the relationship between intelligence and violence. Rather than treating the massive loss of life as a tragedy to be minimized in the future, the humans analyzed each death as a source of tactical data. They examined the effectiveness of different weapons against various types of protection, the psychological impact of different combat scenarios on unit morale, and the optimal distribution of casualties to maximize strategic objectives while maintaining operational capability. The Mark 7 plasma cannons showed a 37% improvement in kill efficiency over the previous generation, reported a human technician with obvious satisfaction. The new targeting algorithms successfully compensated for evasive maneuvers in 83% of engagements. Kill efficiency. They had developed mathematical formulas for measuring how effectively they could end lives. Zhuangxtala found herself struggling to maintain her professional composure as she realized she was witnessing something beyond military analysis. This was the systematic study of death as a technological problem to be optimized. The presentation continued with what the humans called tactical innovation analysis, a review of new strategies and techniques that had emerged during the battle. What Zhuangxtala observed was a species that not only engaged in warfare, but actively worked to improve their methods of destruction. Each engagement was treated as an experiment, each tactical decision as a hypothesis to be tested and refined. The Epsilon Squadron's use of coordinated kinetic bombardment while maintaining defensive screen integrity represents a significant advancement in multi-vector assault doctrine, Admiral Chun explained, gesturing to a holographic reconstruction that showed the systematic annihilation of an enemy formation. We'll be incorporating these techniques into standard training protocols. Standard training protocols. They were going to teach other humans the optimized methods for destroying multiple targets simultaneously. The casual way Admiral Chun discussed the institutionalization of improved killing techniques made Zhuangxtala's skin cycle through color combinations that indicated severe psychological distress. But the most disturbing revelation came during what the humans called psychological warfare assessment. As Zhuangxtala watched in growing horror, human analysts presented detailed studies on the mental effects of different types of combat on both their own personnel and their enemies. They had developed sophisticated understanding of how to maintain their own forces' morale while systematically breaking the will of opposing forces. The deployment of psychological warfare drones during the third phase resulted in a 42% increase in enemy surrender rates, reported a specialist whose role was apparently dedicated to the study of mental manipulation in combat situations. However, we observed diminishing returns after the initial deployment, suggesting that our targets adapted to the psychological pressure more quickly than anticipated. They were studying how to break minds as efficiently as they studied how to break ships. The realization that humans had developed psychological warfare into a precise science sent Zayek into a state of shock that manifested as her skin becoming completely colorless, a physiological response that occurred only in the face of experiences too traumatic for normal processing. Captain Velroth, noticing her condition, attempted to excuse them from the briefing. "Perhaps we should return to our ship to process this information," he suggested diplomatically. But Admiral Chun seemed genuinely concerned about Ziyuaxthala's obvious distress. "Are you experiencing some kind of medical emergency?" she asked, her tone shifting from professional to what appeared to be genuine compassion. "We have medical facilities that might be able to help, though I'm not sure how effective human medicine would be for your species." The offer of medical assistance from beings who had just spent 6 hours perfecting methods of mass destruction struck Ziyuaxthala as the ultimate demonstration of human cognitive dissonance. They could simultaneously study optimal techniques for ending lives and offer compassionate care to a distressed alien observer. I'm simply overwhelmed by the scale of information," Ziyuaxthala managed to reply, her voice translator struggling to convert her species' stress-induced tonal variations into comprehensible human language. Admiral Chen nodded understandingly. "Combat analysis can be overwhelming for species that haven't developed military traditions. Would you prefer to observe some of our more theoretical presentations? We have excellent sessions on strategic philosophy and long-term tactical planning that might be less intensive than the technical analysis." The assumption that her distress was caused by unfamiliarity with military concepts rather than horror at their content revealed another aspect of human psychology that Ziyuaxthala was beginning to understand. These beings were so thoroughly adapted to violence that they couldn't conceive of a reaction to warfare that wasn't based on professional inexperience. As the briefing continued, Ziyuaxthala forced herself to maintain observation protocols despite her psychological state. She needed to complete her mission, and that meant documenting the full scope of human military capability. What she observed over the following hours would eventually force the Galactic Confederation to confront the most challenging question in their history: how to respond to the discovery of a species that had achieved advanced civilization not despite their violent nature, but because of it. The humans weren't just another military species. They were beings who had turned warfare into a comprehensive philosophy, a systematic approach to existence that colored every aspect of their civilization. And as she listened to their enthusiastic discussions of improved destruction techniques and optimized casualty methodologies, she began to understand that her initial mission parameters had been catastrophically inadequate. She wasn't just observing human military capabilities. She was witnessing the discovery of a species that might represent an existential challenge to the peaceful order that had defined galactic civilization for millennia. The tour of human military facilities continued for 3 ship days, each hour revealing new aspects of their civilization that challenged Wexthala's understanding of intelligent life. What had begun as an observation mission had evolved into something approaching an existential crisis as she confronted the reality that an entire species had built their civilization around the systematic study and application of violence. On the second day, Admiral Chun escorted them to what she called the Strategic Development Center, a facility dedicated to planning conflicts that wouldn't occur for decades or even centuries. The scope of human military thinking became apparent as Ziyuaxthala observed teams of analysts working on scenarios involving species they had never met, technologies that didn't yet exist, and strategic challenges that might not emerge for generations. Long-term strategic planning is essential for maintaining tactical superiority, Admiral Chun explained as they walked through chambers filled with holographic displays showing potential future battlefields. We develop contingency plans for every possible contact scenario, resource competition situation, and territorial expansion conflict we might encounter. What disturbed Zhuangxtala wasn't just that humans planned future wars, but the enthusiasm with which they approached the task. These weren't reluctant preparations for potential defensive actions. These were comprehensive offensive and defensive strategies developed with the same intellectual rigor other species might apply to artistic or scientific endeavors. Do you plan for peaceful contact scenarios as well? Captain Velroth asked, his skin showing patterns of barely controlled alarm. Admiral Chun looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Of course. Peaceful contact requires just as much strategic planning as military engagement. You have to understand the potential adversary's capabilities, motivations, and likely tactical responses to various diplomatic approaches. The only difference is that peaceful contact simply represents one category of strategic engagement, rather than the full spectrum. The casual way she described diplomatic contact as a subset of military strategy revealed another fundamental aspect of human thinking. To them, all interactions with other beings were essentially tactical situations to be analyzed, planned, and executed using military-derived methodologies. Peace wasn't the absence of warfare. It was simply warfare conducted through alternative means. The most disturbing facility they visited was what humans called the Innovation Laboratory, a research center dedicated to developing new weapons and combat techniques. As they toured through chambers filled with devices whose purpose could only be the efficient termination of life, Zhuangxtala realized that human scientific advancement was inextricably linked to their pursuit of improved methods of destruction. We're particularly excited about our recent breakthroughs in quantum disruption technology, explained a human scientist with obvious pride. The new systems can destabilize molecular bonds at the quantum level, effectively causing matter to simply cease existing in any recognizable form. The tactical applications are extraordinary. They had developed weapons that could make matter stop existing. The concept was so fundamentally horrifying that Zhuangxtala found herself unable to respond. How did one react to beings who had devoted their scientific capabilities to inventing new ways to violate the basic laws of physics in service of destruction? But what truly challenged her understanding was the realization that human weapons development wasn't driven by immediate military needs. These beings were developing destructive capabilities for theoretical future conflicts against enemies they had never met. They were innovating methods of annihilation as an intellectual exercise, pursuing improved techniques for ending life with the same dedication other species applied to art, philosophy, or spiritual development. The third day brought what Admiral Chun described as their most significant revelation, the opportunity to observe human training facilities. What Zhuangxtala witnessed challenged every assumption about the relationship between intelligent development and violent capability. Human military training wasn't simply instruction in the use of weapons or tactical procedures. It was a comprehensive educational system that developed every aspect of their beings in service of more effective warfare. Physical conditioning that pushed their bodies to performance levels that would be considered dangerous for most species. Mental training that enhanced their ability to make rapid tactical decisions under extreme stress, and psychological conditioning that enabled them to function effectively while surrounded by death and destruction. Military service is considered essential for full citizenship in most human societies, Admiral Chun explained as they observed thousands of young humans undergoing various forms of combat training. The discipline, tactical thinking, and stress management skills developed through military service are considered fundamental to personal development. They raised their children to be warriors. The realization that human civilization systematically conditioned every generation to view violence as a normal and necessary aspect of existence struck Zhuangxtala with the force of physical impact. These beings didn't simply engage in warfare when forced to. They actively prepared their offspring for lives of organized conflict. What was even more disturbing was the obvious enthusiasm of the trainees. These young humans weren't reluctant participants in mandatory military conditioning. They were eager volunteers who had specifically chosen to develop their capacity for destruction. They trained with the same dedication and excitement that young members of other species might show for artistic or academic pursuits. Military training develops character. Explain a young human who couldn't have been more than 20 standard years old. It teaches you discipline, teamwork, and how to perform under pressure. Plus, you get to work with some really incredible technology. Incredible technology for ending lives. They viewed weapons of mass destruction as exciting technological achievements rather than horrifying necessities. The cognitive disconnect was so profound that ZYXTHALA began to question whether humans and other galactic species could even be considered the same category of being. The culminating experience of her visit came on the third day when Admiral Chun offered to demonstrate what she called individual combat capability assessment. What followed was ZYXTHALA's first exposure to human personal combat skills, and the experience would haunt her for the rest of her career. The demonstration involved a single human soldier engaging multiple combat scenarios designed to test various aspects of personal military capability. What ZYXTHALA observed was a level of individual combat effectiveness that exceeded the collective military capability of entire Confederation member species. The human moved through obstacles and challenges with a fluid efficiency that suggested violence wasn't just something they had learned, but something they had evolved for. Whether engaging multiple opponents simultaneously, adapting to rapidly changing tactical situations, or employing weapons with a precision that bordered on artistic, the individual displayed capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about biological limitations. Standard human infantry training produces soldiers capable of engaging multiple opponents simultaneously while maintaining strategic awareness and tactical flexibility, Admiral Chen commented as they watched the demonstration. Advanced training can enhance these capabilities significantly. Standard training. What ZYXTHALA was witnessing wasn't the result of specialized enhancement or technological augmentation. It was the baseline capability of ordinary human soldiers. The implications were staggering. If individual humans possessed this level of combat effectiveness, what did that suggest about their collective military potential? The question was answered when Admiral Chun provided access to what she called strategic capability assessments, comprehensive analyses of human military potential across their entire civilization. The data was so overwhelming that ZYXTHALA required several hours just to process the basic numerical information. Humans maintained active military forces numbering in the billions across hundreds of star systems. Their weapons technology exceeded Confederation capabilities by orders of magnitude. Their strategic planning encompassed scenarios involving conflicts spanning multiple galaxies. Their industrial capacity was specifically designed to support extended warfare against opponents whose capabilities were purely theoretical. But the most disturbing revelation was their rate of military advancement. Human combat capabilities were improving at an exponential rate that suggested they could achieve tactical superiority over any known galactic civilization within decades rather than centuries. They weren't just another military species. They were a force that could potentially dominate or destroy every other intelligent civilization in known space. As the tour concluded and ZYXTHALA prepared to return to the ethereal dawn, Admiral Chun made an offer that would force the Galactic Confederation to confront the most critical decision in their history. "We've enjoyed this opportunity for cultural exchange," she said with apparent sincerity. "We'd like to propose formal contact between human civilization and your Galactic Confederation. We think there's tremendous potential for mutual benefit. Mutual benefit from beings whose idea of cultural exchange included detailed demonstrations of their capacity for annihilation." As ZYXTHALA considered how to respond, she realized that her mission had evolved beyond simple observation into something far more critical. Determining whether the galaxy could survive contact with a species that had made warfare into the foundation of their entire civilization. The answer to that question would determine the future of every intelligent species in known space. And as she prepared her report for the Confederation Council, she began to understand that her observations might trigger the most important decision in galactic history, whether to attempt peaceful coexistence with humanity or to unite every other species in an effort to contain them before they could spread their violent philosophy throughout the galaxy. The humans weren't just another species to be contacted and integrated. They were a potential existential threat to the peaceful order that had defined galactic civilization for millennia, and her report would determine how the galaxy responded to that threat. The journey back to Confederation space took 14 ship days, during which HFY struggled to compile her observations into a coherent report that could convey the full implications of human military capability without triggering a panic that might destabilize galactic civilization. How did one explain to peaceful species that they had encountered beings who had achieved advanced intelligence, not despite their violent nature, but because they had channeled that violence into a comprehensive philosophy of existence? Captain Velroth spent most of the return journey reviewing the recorded data, his skin cycling through color patterns that indicated deep psychological disturbance. On the seventh day, he approached HFY with a question that had been haunting both of them since leaving human space. "Do you think they know?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying undertones of barely controlled fear. "Do they understand what they are?" HFY considered the question carefully. During her time aboard the human station, she had observed no evidence that humans recognized their fundamental difference from other intelligent species. To them, their approach to existence was simply normal, the logical way that intelligent beings would naturally develop. They seemed genuinely puzzled by the concept that other species might have evolved beyond warfare, treating such ideas as interesting theoretical possibilities rather than realistic alternatives. "I don't think they understand that they're unique," she replied. "From their perspective, they're simply a young species sharing their cultural achievements with galactic civilization. They can't conceive of intelligence that isn't fundamentally tactical." The realization that humans were essentially innocent of the threat they represented made the situation even more complex. They weren't malevolent conquerors seeking to dominate other species. They were beings who had developed along a completely different evolutionary path, creating a civilization that was incompatible with peaceful coexistence not through malice, but through fundamental philosophical differences. As the ethereal dawn approached the outer boundaries of Confederation space, HFY received a priority transmission from Admiral Chen. The communication had been sent through what the humans called quantum entanglement relay systems, technology that allowed instantaneous communication across galactic distances and represented yet another example of their advanced capabilities. Researcher HFY, Admiral Chen's image appeared on the main display with the same friendly demeanor she had shown throughout their visit. "I wanted to follow up on our discussions and provide you with some additional information that might be useful for your report to the Galactic Confederation." What followed was a presentation that would fundamentally alter the strategic balance of the galaxy. Admiral Chen calmly explained that human military analysts had been observing Confederation space for several years, conducting detailed assessments of every member species' military capabilities, industrial capacity, and strategic vulnerabilities. "We've identified 17 distinct species within your Confederation, each with unique tactical characteristics and technological capabilities," she continued with obvious enthusiasm. "We've developed comprehensive strategic profiles for potential diplomatic, economic, and, if necessary, military engagement with each civilization. They've been studying the galaxy like a tactical problem to be solved." While the Confederation had been debating whether to make contact with humanity, humans had already conducted detailed intelligence gathering operations against every member species. They knew exactly what they were dealing with, while the galaxy remained ignorant of the true scope of human capabilities. "We're particularly interested in establishing formal diplomatic relations," Admiral Chen continued, "but we wanted to be transparent about our strategic assessment capabilities. We believe that honest communication about mutual military potential is essential for building trust between civilizations. The casual way she discussed surveillance of sovereign civilizations as a prerequisite for diplomatic contact revealed another aspect of human thinking that challenged galactic norms. To them, gathering detailed intelligence about potential allies or enemies wasn't a hostile act. It was simply responsible strategic planning. But the most disturbing revelation came in the transmission's final segment. Admiral Chun explained that human civilization had been expanding rapidly throughout previously unexplored regions of the galaxy, establishing colonies and military installations at a rate that exceeded the Confederation's most aggressive expansion scenarios. We currently maintain active presence in over 400 star systems, she reported with obvious pride, with expansion proceeding at approximately 30 new systems per standard galactic year. We're always interested in establishing cooperative relationships with other civilizations, but we want to ensure that our continued expansion doesn't inadvertently threaten established territorial claims. 400 star systems. Human civilization was larger than the entire Galactic Confederation, and it was growing at a rate that would make them the dominant force in known space within decades. The peaceful galaxy that had defined intelligent life for millennia was already being reshaped by a species that most civilizations didn't know existed. When the transmission ended, ZYX found herself staring at strategic implications that rendered her original mission parameters completely inadequate. She hadn't just observed human military capabilities. She had documented the emergence of a force that could fundamentally alter the balance of galactic civilization. The emergency session of the Confederation Council convened within hours of ZYX's return to Confederation space. Representatives from all 17 member species gathered in the council chamber, their various forms of emotional expression creating a symphony of anxiety, confusion, and barely controlled panic as she presented her findings. The Veltheri delegation, led by Ambassador Thelaroon, responded with characteristic emphasis on peaceful solutions. Surely any intelligent species can be reasoned with, he argued, his luminous form pulsing with optimistic patterns. If we approach them with genuine offers of cooperation and mutual benefit, they will recognize the advantages of peaceful coexistence. The Corvin delegation's response was immediate and predictable. General Morthan, his massive armored form radiating aggressive determination, advocated for immediate military action. This human threat must be eliminated before they can expand further into our regions of influence, he declared. We cannot permit a species with their destructive capabilities to establish a dominant position in galactic politics. But it was the response from the Zephyrian Science Council that revealed the true scope of the challenge humanity represented. Elder scientist Vexnari, whose species had devoted themselves to pure intellectual pursuit for over 10,000 years, presented an analysis that left the council in stunned silence. Based on the data provided by researcher Zwaxthala, she reported in the crystalline tones characteristic of her species, human technological advancement exceeds our capabilities in every significant category. Their weapons technology is centuries ahead of our defensive systems. Their industrial capacity surpasses our collective manufacturing ability. Their strategic planning encompasses scenarios we have never considered. The scientific assessment was devastating. If the Confederation chose to oppose humanity militarily, they would face a species that exceeded their capabilities in every relevant category. If they chose peaceful coexistence, they would be dealing with beings whose fundamental nature was incompatible with the philosophical foundations of galactic civilization. Elder Vexnari continued with an analysis that would reshape everything the galaxy thought it knew about intelligent evolution. The humans represent something outside our theoretical models of civilized development. They have achieved advanced intelligence while retaining and enhancing their predatory instincts. They have built a technological civilization specifically designed to support and improve their capacity for violence. They are in essence predators who have learned to think. Predators who have learned to think. The phrase captured something essential about humanity that had eluded Buextala's attempts to categorize them. They weren't a military species that happened to be advanced. They were an advanced species that had never abandoned their fundamental nature as hunters and killers. The debate that followed would continue for months, dividing the Confederation along philosophical and practical lines. Some species advocated for immediate contact, hoping to establish peaceful relations before humans expanded further into Confederation space. Others supported military preparation, arguing that the galaxy needed to unite against a common threat. A few suggested withdrawal to distant regions of space, abandoning known civilization rather than attempting to coexist with beings whose very existence challenged the foundations of peaceful society. But as Buextala listened to the various proposals and counterproposals, she realized that the Council was debating responses to a situation that had already fundamentally changed. While they discussed how to deal with humanity, humans were continuing their expansion, developing new technologies, and strengthening their military capabilities. Every day of debate gave them additional advantages that might prove decisive in any future conflict. The final decision, when it came, represented a compromise that satisfied no one while addressing the essential reality of their situation. The Confederation would attempt diplomatic contact while simultaneously preparing for potential military conflict. They would share basic information about galactic civilization while withholding sensitive technological and strategic data. They would hope for peaceful coexistence while planning for the possibility that such coexistence might prove impossible. As the council session concluded and representatives returned to their home systems to implement the new policy, Buextala found herself assigned to a role she had never anticipated. Serving as the Confederation's primary human cultural liaison, responsible for ongoing contact and assessment of the species that might determine the future of galactic civilization. In the months that followed, as formal diplomatic contact proceeded and the full scope of human civilization gradually became apparent to galactic society, Buextala would often reflect on Admiral Chen's final message, transmitted just hours before the Council's decision was announced. We're looking forward to productive relationships with all members of galactic civilization, the Admiral had said with apparent sincerity. We have so much we can learn from each other, and we're excited about the opportunities for mutual advancement that formal contact will provide. The humans genuinely believed that their approach to existence represented a positive contribution to galactic civilization. They couldn't understand why other species might view their capabilities as threatening rather than beneficial. To them, their mastery of destruction was simply one more technological achievement to be shared and celebrated, comparable to advances in medicine, engineering, or scientific understanding. As Buextala prepared for her new role as humanity's primary point of contact with galactic civilization, she realized that her original mission had been fundamentally transformed. She was no longer just observing human combat capabilities. She was serving as the primary interface between two completely incompatible approaches to intelligent existence. The peaceful galaxy that had defined her entire life was gone, replaced by a new reality in which survival might depend on learning to think like predators. And as she prepared her first formal diplomatic communication with Admiral Chen, she couldn't escape the feeling that everything that followed would be determined by whether the galaxy could adapt to accommodate beings who had made warfare into an art form, or whether such adaptation would transform galactic civilization into something that could no longer be called peaceful. The humans weren't just another species to be integrated into galactic society. They were harbingers of a fundamental change that would force every intelligent civilization to confront the question of whether peace and intelligence could coexist with beings who had achieved both while never abandoning their essential nature as apex predators. And the answer to that question would determine whether the galaxy's future would be shaped by the philosophical traditions that had guided civilized development for millennia, or by the tactical doctrines of a species that had never learned to separate intelligence from the capacity for destruction.